Okay, you're live.
It still shows pre-live on mine.
That may be yours, Steve. I have you live on my side.
All right. Well, we will get going. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, on this September 23rd as we visit some important ideas and things for school finance officers and others as well, especially in this broadcast on things that are new and coming out. And we have some additional answers that maybe we didn't have last week during the superintendent's webcast as well. So we have, some updates on the vaccine incentives. We also have maintenance of equity update. And we also have a overview of the special session that went on with the General Assembly this summer. So we have lots of great information. And as always, if you will look at the top right of your screen, you will see the little question mark with kind of a circle around it. That's where you can ask and see questions that are asked of us. And so we will try to get those as we go along. But what we're going to do today is a little bit different than in the past, because a lot of times we go section by section and talk and then answer questions, talk and then answer questions. But due to the large volume of information that we hope to get out today, we're going to push those to the end and answer as many as we can. And then even those that we don't get to answer online, we'll still be able to answer those as a group through email or those kind of things. So just want to let you know a little bit about what's in store for you today. So I will pass it over to Ms. Robin Kinney, who will get us started on the vaccines.
Robin, you're on mute.
You think I would have learned by now. Thank you very much, Jesse. If we can go back up to the first slide, just the introductory slide first. Steve has shared with you sort of our agenda. It is pretty packed today, and so we are going to ask that we answer your questions at the end. Next slide, please. We are going to kick off with an overview of the vaccine incentive. Many of you may have already heard about this program from your local superintendents. We did announce it last week. I want to do one quick, I will say, sort of a public service announcement before I jump into the vaccine incentive announcement, and that is about ARP-ESSER. So I'm veering off the agenda for just a bit to make this one quick announcement. The ARP-ESSER assurances and spending plans that are required from each district to access your funds, the deadline for submission of those has passed. So I want to make this announcement for those of you that have not yet been able to complete those. We want you to complete those as soon as possible. As of today, 167 assurances and 158 spending plans have been received by KDE. If you are waiting to amend that because of the vaccine incentive announcement, we'd ask you to go ahead and submit it anyway so we can get these reported to US Ed. And then you can always amend or change that spending plan at a later date. So I wanted to make sure that I announced that on behalf of my budget staff here who are anxiously awaiting the receipt of those assurances and spending plans. Thank you very much for joining us today. Always appreciate the time that we have to spend with finance officers and talk about important things that are happening in your local school district. Also want to express our thanks and gratitude to you and all the folks in our local school districts who have started the school year. It's once again been a very difficult start to our school year for many of us, and can't express our appreciation enough for all that you do each and every day on behalf of your local school districts, your staff, your students, and of course your communities. It takes all of you to really make it as smooth as it can in spite of all the challenges that we continue to face. So a note of thank you before we get started. We're going to share information today on the vaccine incentive program. The vaccine incentive program was announced to your superintendents, and it's designed really to recognize those employees that have already sought out and spent their time and effort in seeking a vaccination and becoming vaccinated. But it's also to incent those in our local school districts that have not done so yet. In order for all of this to get to a manageable level, of course, we are seeking that vaccination for as many folks as possible. It's a greater likelihood that we will have the best chance at in-person instruction to continue without interruption. And your communities overall will benefit more from those higher vaccination rates, less illness, less hospitalization that are affecting so many of us. This is another tool in the toolbox in addition to those other mitigation strategies that you're already utilizing. And that includes the face masking, the social distancing, the hand washing, and sanitization of our local school districts. First slide, please. Excuse me. So the Vaccination Incentive Program is a voluntary program for districts, so you do not have to participate if you don't want to. All full and part-time employees are eligible, and that includes both certified and classified if they are employed. And we've used the word anytime in this slide presentation between July 1st, 2021 and December 1st, 2021. The reason we put any time in there is a couple of reasons. We want to make sure that if you have people that are you're part of your workforce right now and they retire during this time frame, they could still be eligible even if they retire before that December 1st deadline, provided they meet the other eligibility requirements. And then also, we have included full and part-time substitute teachers as eligible. So we're hoping that even if you don't have those substitutes on board right now, then this may be a recruitment tool to help you get some of those substitute teachers on board. So we use that anytime with that context. It's really not designed for someone that just comes and works for a day and you never see them again. It is really about employment, but wanting to make that clarification. Full and part-time substitute teachers are eligible, and we've had some districts ask, may we put some kind of local requirement on the minimum number of work days or hours for our substitute population? And of course you can do that, but full and part-time substitute teachers are eligible. As announced at the superintendent's webcast, all local Board of Education members are eligible. And then we've had some questions about paraprofessionals, coaches, paid paraprofessionals and paid coaches are eligible. But we've also had some questions that we have deemed not eligible. We've had some questions about students that you may pay in a certain capacity for services to your schools. That might be like kids that are tutoring or mentoring. They are not eligible as students. This program is really targeted to employees. We've had questions about SBDM parents. SBDM parents are not eligible. Other members of your SBDM councils, of course, may be employees of your school districts, which are already eligible. And then volunteers. Under this program, volunteers, they do not receive any kind of payment, payroll or payment from the school district, and therefore they are not eligible. Next slide, please. So the amount is $100 for vaccinated school year 21-22 with those caveats we discussed on the earlier slide, full or part-time school district employees. For purposes of this program, vaccinated means they have already received or will receive 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna or a single dose of Johnson & Johnson Janssen. You do not need to wait for that 14-day period after the vaccinations, as we sometimes see sort of in the context of either a quarantine or other information that you have received. This is about the actual vaccination itself. So as long as they have those 2 doses of Moderna, Pfizer, or a single dose of Johnson & Johnson, they are vaccinated for purposes of this program. To be eligible, the employee must be vaccinated on or before December 1st, 2021. So there is that cutoff date. We've had some questions about, well, what if they couldn't get the second dose? For whatever reason, they must complete the 2 doses for Pfizer and Moderna or the single dose of Johnson & Johnson in order to be eligible. The district must verify the employee's vaccination status through either the vaccination card, the CDC card that many of us are very, very familiar with, or a signed statement from a licensed provider. That is their proof to you as the district that they are vaccinated. And it should be included in the employee's payroll on or before January 31st, 2022. Generally, I will say when we reference the employee's payroll, we do recognize, and as we've talked with districts, there's been some questions around payroll itself. We do understand that there are some of these folks that may be eligible and meet the requirements, but you don't necessarily pay through payroll. However, we would strongly recommend that you pay through payroll, as this is taxable income, and so you want to make it as easy as possible to pay it through that payroll. You will need to submit a final CDIP report for Munis Project 554GV by April 25th of 2022. Next slide, please. So districts will be reimbursed because, like with all our federal funds, you are making that payment first and then we are reimbursing you $100 per eligible person verified by the district. Applicable taxes must be withheld, but retirement is not withheld. We have received guidance from KTRS and KPPA, the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority, which handles CERS, and retirement does not need to be withheld for this incentive. The employer's share of taxes should be paid by the district from a permissible fund source. ESSER is a permissible fund source. And districts are encouraged but not required to add funds to the state incentive reimbursement amount. Thank you to those districts that I've already heard from that you are providing either a match or some other form of additional compensation for this incentive program. Next slide, please. We've had some questions about, is board action required? Board action is not required by KDE to participate, but your local board policy may require board action. And certainly in the case if you are requesting that additional districts funds be allocated toward this effort, you would need to be in front of your board and discuss with your board. The districts must complete an assurance document, which would be available in GMAP on or before October 1st. And we have a draft of that already completed, but we're actually using the time from the superintendent's webcast to now as we continue to hear questions from our finance officers and others, trying to make sure that we make that assurance document as clear as possible. But we will have that posted before October 1st for you to take a look at. You do not need to wait on signing the assurance document. When you see it, the assurance document allows you to put in numbers of individuals that you're seeking for reimbursement. So you don't need to you don't need to sign the assurance document up front as we require with many of our programs. You can actually start your program now, and then your assurance document will actually be signed when you're requesting that federal cash reimbursement and are ready to seek reimbursement from KDE. Districts shall submit a single federal cash request to KDE. So even if you are going ahead and paying out to your employees, we are asking for one single federal cash request, and we're giving you until March 31st, 2022 to ask for that reimbursement. We don't wish to receive every time if it goes across multiple payrolls or however you're doing it, we don't want to receive that federal cash request each time that you make that payout. So keep that in mind, a single federal cash request to KDE no later than March 31st, 2022. And then at the bottom of that slide, you'll see the Munis coding that we've put in there, both project and object numbers. Next slide, please. So we've just included a few of the questions that we've received, seem to be common questions that we're receiving from lots of districts. Can we require a substitute be in a position for a certain number of days to be eligible? Yes, you can define a number of days or hours worked, provided they meet those requirements by December 1st, 2021. Do vaccine incentive payments need to be paid on a separate check and not part of an employee's regular monthly check? Again, we're going to leave that flexibility to local districts. We have again, encourage you to make it through payroll to the extent possible, but we do recognize you may have isolated instances that would require a separate check from your normal payroll. Would we use object code 0113 for certified staff payments, 132 for classified staff? Yes, and we will post. As I was preparing remarks for today, it occurred to me that we didn't have on there for people that are not certified or classified. So we will provide another object code for you to use for those others, like your local school board members. Next slide, please. Should districts request and retain copies of the vaccination card as proof of eligibility? We've talked about that as far as, yes, you should request a copy of that. And I would encourage you to work with your HR area about the best way to retain a copy of that so that you are complying with record retention for confidential information. This is health information. You can ask for it, but I would encourage you to work with your HR representatives on the appropriate way to retain that information in case you get audited at a later date. Can substitute teachers or other staff that work in multiple districts receive an incentive payment for more than one district? No. And it is important. We are working on a document just as a sample that for those of you, those staff, substitute teachers or other staff that work in multiple districts, you would want them to verify that they have not received the KDE vaccine incentive from another district, nor will they request that. We will have a sample form, but I would encourage you to work with your local school board attorney on what you would ask those people to sign. Next slide, please. And finally, if an otherwise eligible employee retires, are they eligible to receive the COVID-19 vaccine? And I think I addressed that in earlier remarks, that as long as they are fully vaccinated and meet those any local board participation requirements, retired employees would be able, an employee who is retiring could receive that. Next slide, please. And then finally, this slide just kind of summarizes some key dates to keep in mind. Of course, the announcement made on September 10th. December 1st is the critical date to keep in mind for eligibility. Any vaccines received on or before this date qualify for the incentive payment from KDE's program. Your payments to employees must be accomplished on or before January 31st of 2022. And then you must seek reimbursement from KDE through that single federal cash request and the signing of your assurance document no later than March 1st, 2022. We've kind of hit the high levels. We have a few more questions that we'll keep until the end of today's presentation so that we can move quickly through today's materials. And I think next up is Jessie Carlton. And Jessie's going to talk to you with good news about maintenance of equity. There you go, Jessie.
Thanks, Robin. Good afternoon, everybody. And like Robin said, I have the good fortune to bring you guys some good news today about maintenance of equity. So let's run on to the next slide, please. As a quick reminder, let's just kind of go over what maintenance of equity is. Slide just shows here that, this is required at both the district and the state level. Today, we're just going to focus on the district requirements. Districts are required to maintain that per pupil expenditure and per pupil staffing numbers at the high poverty schools in the districts, trying to maintain equity there. These maintenance of equity requirements are for the school year 2021-22 and 22-23. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to talk today, there it is. What we're going to talk today is mainly going to talk about the requirements for the 21-22 school year. So these maintenance of equity requirements for this year. Next slide. Okay, so I've received a few emails and calls that said, after the last time we talked about maintenance of equity, you said you were going to send some stuff out and I haven't got anything. Have I missed it? You haven't missed it. We were kind of holding because we knew there was some updated guidance possibly coming out and we wanted to hear everything U.S. Department of Ed said. And so since we talked to you guys last, U.S. Ed has issued some updated guidance. After the first set of guidance, there were lots of questions from states, and they had to kind of go back and revisit some things. So there was a Dear Colleague letter that was put out on August 6th, and there was also some updates to the guidance document that we referenced last time, the one with all the frequently asked questions at the bottom. The biggest impact to districts in this updated guidance is the change to frequently asked question number 32. It's on page 20 if you want to look at it in that document. There is now an exception from the 21-22 maintenance of equity requirements for districts that can certify that they will not implement an aggregate reduction in combined state and local per pupil funding in fiscal year 22. So that's mainly what we're going to talk about today, this new exception for the requirements during this year. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so what does that mean for you guys? After all of the questions came in after the first release from US Ed, they stated in updated guidance that they now recognize that there were some challenges and uncertainties with the 21-22 budget cycle that made these requirements fall into the category that they considered exceptional or uncontrollable circumstances. So what they've decided is for this year, the 21-22 school year, they're letting districts identify an exception if they can certify that they're not going to implement any type of reduction in this year. So instead of doing all of the reporting requirements and all of the comparing, what you'll need to do is you're going to be able to certify that just as a whole from state and local perspective on per pupil expenditures that you're not going to reduce that. Let's see, next slide, please. Okay, so this exception is just for the 21-22 school year. Okay, so we cannot say for sure, but at KDE, we do believe that most, if not all, of the districts in Kentucky are going to be able to fall under this exception. Now, to certify that your district falls under this exception, US Ed has provided a document that they're calling the LEA Certification of Exception from Maintenance of Equity Requirements. If you'd like to see the whole certification, they've included that under Appendix B in the updated guidance, and that's a link in this presentation that you'll be able to access as soon as we're done here with the presentation. Let's see, we're going to plan on adding this document or this assurance to GMAP. We've done this with several other assurances. Robin spoke of one earlier, so that's kind of a process everyone should be familiar about. To get the exception, you'll have to complete the assurance and fill it out through GMAP. If you feel that your district doesn't fall under this exception after hearing what we have to say today, just please reach out to me and give me a call. Next slide, please. Okay, this is kind of just a snippet of the top of the assurance and what it will look like. We're going to try and have this into GMAP in early October. Like all assurances, your superintendent will need to certify this. KDE will send out an email to all finance officers when this is available in GMAP. And I believe GMAP also has some type of notification when something's new is in there. You may get an email that it's there. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide lays out all of your options for exceptions in the 21-22 school year. So like I said before, if you don't qualify under this stable revenue exception, which is number 1 on this list, you are still going to be able to request some of the other exceptions that were always a part of the maintenance of equity requirements. So the way we're going to handle this is we believe if it turns out that we are right and the majority of districts do fall under this first exception, this stable revenue exception, and we get the majority of districts completing the assurance that says, yes, we certify that we're not going to reduce state and local per pupil funding during the 21-22 school year, we'll be able to give that information to the Department of US Ed, and we'll go from there. Now, if we do have a handful of districts that do not qualify, then what we'll do is we will reach out to those districts individually, because you can see there are the other options that are still in play here. As we've talked about before, you have the enrollment of less than 1,000 students, or your single school district, single grade per grade span, and at the very end there is that other exceptional circumstances option. Now, that option, if we get down to number 5 and your district feels you can qualify through the other exceptional circumstances, we will need to engage the U.S. Department of Education to get that signed off on. But we believe for this year, for 21-22, most, if not all, districts will qualify under one of those 1 through 4 options. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this is just a reminder of what was part of the maintenance of equity requirements. All of these maintenance of equity requirements will return for everyone in fiscal year 23, and they do exist, they still exist now for fiscal year 22, but we feel that the majority of our districts, if not all, will qualify under one of those other exceptions. After we've gotten everything for this year squared away with maintenance of equity, we see who falls under the stable revenue exceptions and any of the other exceptions. Once all that's squared away, we're going to reach back out to finance officers and talk about these requirements again for fiscal year 23. Districts will need to take these requirements under consideration as they prepare budgets for the 22-23 school year. But the good news is now with the stable revenue exception, we're hoping that this kind of gives the majority of districts, if not all the districts, kind of a break from this requirement this year, so that you can, have the full time that we think is needed to plan for this requirement when you start budgets for the next year. So I think that is my last slide. Yes, and I think I am going to hand off to Mr. Chuck Truesdale to talk about the special session updates.
Thanks, Jesse.
Problem.
I will sort of start off by saying that this is the same presentation that I gave to the superintendent's webcast last week. So if any of you were watching that, a lot of this may be rehashed, but there have been some new developments, and so there may be some changes. So next slide, please. So as we all know, the special session was called to deal with a variety of issues related to COVID-19 and other issues, including some economic development incentives. However, we're going to break down the 3 items related to education into these 3 different buckets, and one of those is public health. The first one related to public health, as I'm sure all of you know by now, is that the State Board of Education's masking policy is now null, void, and unenforceable. So beginning last Friday, every district in the state is under their own individual mask policy. And you should, I would hope, know what those mask policies are for your particular school district. All but 5 districts are currently still under universal masking policy. But each district will have a school operations plan in place. As you will all know, because you're finance officers, this will probably be the same school operations plan that you had to qualify for your ARP-ESSER funds. All of those districts should have submitted their plans to KDE by last week. Not all of them have, of course, and so we are our Office of Continuous Improvement and Support is reaching out to those districts. The other thing to keep in mind is that that plan must be available on your district's website. Again, that was also a term for your ARP-ESSER funds. So next slide, please. The other side of the the public health portion is test to stay. The Department for Public Health was required to develop a model school plan by tomorrow. That is now up, and I believe we have a slide, perhaps the next slide will show you the URL to go to for that. KDE also has guidance on test to stay, or guidance related to that program and other related COVID-19 issues. The Test to Stay program, for those of you who are somewhat unfamiliar with it, is many of you already know that if a student is exposed, DPH guidance, CDC guidance, depending on the student's circumstances, would be to quarantine that student. Test to Stay is a way to allow those students to test on a daily basis there at the school facility, and if they test negative, remain there at the school facility getting their in-person instruction, because I think we all agree at this point that we have learned over the last 20 months or so that in-person education and instruction is probably the best method for most students. Again, with Test to Stay, this is optional for districts. You may implement it, you are not required to. Local health departments are required under Senate Bill 1 to provide assistance to local school districts implementing this or any other board public health policy. However, keep in mind that although a separate piece of legislation in the special session did allow federal funding to flow to programs like these, it may not necessarily be an issue of funding, it may be an issue of capacity, whether that's at the school district level or the health department level. So always work with your health department on this issue. Next slide, please. I will turn this over to, I believe, Che Ritter to deal with your attendance issues.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm trying to get my video on here. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk very briefly about attendance and Senate Bill, pardon me, Senate Bill 1. This is a few changes on this slide from the other day. So this gets a little complicated, but we're going to try to simplify this some. And the main point of this, and please pay close attention to this, if your district does not wish to change anything, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to contact us. We'll just move forward with the ADA that you have, and so you don't need to submit anything. So, however, for the remainder, for school year 21-22, districts may substitute 2018-19 or 2019-20 attendance data, and this will impact your SEEK funding in FY 22-23. So many districts that did, if you recall, a couple years ago, we did the whole, most districts stuck with 18-19 SAR data, which went into 19-20 SEEK. I think 14 districts chose 19-20 SAR data, and that was then. Now this is a bit of a change. So if you want to keep your prior AADA selection under Senate Bill 177 in 2020 and House Bill 208 in 2021, nothing is required. You don't need to do anything. We're just going to push it forward. If your district wishes to change its selection, you're going to email Jessica Carlton at education.ky.gov, or you can also reach out to her, but I would. And we have pushed this deadline up. I believe the deadline was September 24th. It is now October 8th. So going forward, SEEK will also use the current year property assessment data. We're also going to get an exceptional child count like we always do. That will be in December of 2021, just about a couple months. And that will be pushed forward into the 22-23 SEEK cycle, as well as LEP. So those three numbers we'll have actual data for. The remainder, which will be your AADA, and as well as your at-risk and home hospital, that will be based on either your existing data that you have today, or if you wish to change, you can, obviously change it to 18-19, or if you were one of the 19-20 districts, you may want to revert back to 18-19. Districts must continue to take and enforce compulsory attendance under KRS Chapter 159. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now this is where it gets a little more complicated. It's the same, but it's a little more detailed. So districts that elected to choose 2018 SAR data, and that was most districts, the vast majority, for 2019-20 SEEK, 2021 SEEK, and 21-22 SEEK, and the districts wants to continue to use that data, you do nothing. So that's the only option for those districts that chose 18-19. If the district elected 2019-20 SAR data, and there's about 14 of you all, you can use the 19-20, stick with what you have, and you do nothing, no action is needed, or the 19-20 can revert back to 18-19. And if you do that, if you're one of the 14, then you will notify Jesse by email, preferably by October 8th. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so when you look at Senate Bill 1, there were some questions we got early on about, well, why can't I use 22-23 SEEK? So there is what I would call a conundrum to this, which is the data that you're looking at right now, which is the cycle we're in now, is going to be fairly unreliable. So you have students that are being in and out of virtual instruction, the QRS and TRI attendance codes for virtual instruction. These codes require that transportation is removed because they're getting virtual instruction, they're not being transported. So this will impact your transportation funding to some extent. Also, virtual and performance-based students are also marked as non-transported. So if you're a district that transports students, this could have a great impact on your SEEK transportation funding formula as we calculate it in March of 2022. So therein lies one of I think the difficult decisions is if you did choose to use 22-23, it is essentially a gamble that the transportation funding formula could wipe out any gains you have, and also we just simply don't know, because in the funding formula for transportation, everybody else's actions can impact your funding as well. So it's not just tied to, I have a student, he's worth this much in that funding formula. It's really impacted by what other districts doing too. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So of the 14 that chose to use 2019 SAR data, and if you recall, this is back when many districts had shifted into delivering meals, and students were obviously being taught virtually. All of those districts lost transportation funding because of the 1920 choice. They did not transport as many days, and thus were not transporting as many students as they normally do during a usual year. Over half the districts lost overall funding. So the increase in NTI days, which is non-transported, drove most of those losses. And there will not be an increase in NTI days during the 21-22 school year, but there will be a large increase in non-transport days for all the students receiving virtual instruction. We just don't simply know what the impact will be yet. All right, next slide, please. All right, I may have to have Jesse help me a little bit with this one. Until December 31st, districts may use up to 20 days where a district as a whole is in person, but may use remote instruction for individual schools, grades, classrooms, and student groups. Students on remote instruction must receive minimum daily instruction. The superintendent must have prior board authorization to use, and districts will code temporary remote instruction days as TRI and Infinite Campus. And Jesse, where are we on guidance with that? Is it still forthcoming?
Nope. It has actually, it was forthcoming because we were having trouble with our website, but it is actually out on the website now. I will try and get I think what we've done is we've sent a link out to your DPPs to that guidance. It's on our website. So it's very similar to the QRS guidance. It's just called a different 3 letters right now, but it's out there on our website now.
All right, I think I stole Chuck's thunder. I'm sure that slide upsets him. He didn't get to talk about that. I'm sorry, Chuck.
I will never complain about that.
All right.
The one thing I would note on this, because we've gotten a lot of questions, is that these 20 days for temporary remote instruction, number one, they're not going to count against your 10 days for NTI. Those are completely separate pots. However, the very important thing to remember is that is 20 days per district. So for instance, if you have a 5th grade class or the entire 5th grade or entire school in your district is out on October 1st, that is 1 day. The next day, you have a different elementary school or a different grade within that elementary school. They go to remote instruction while the rest of the district is in attendance. That's day 2. It is not 20 days per building. It's not 20 days per individual student. It is 20 days for the entire district. So those of you, if you're in a district that has one school in your district, then that probably won't make much of a difference to you. However, if you're a larger district that has multiple schools, that will make a difference. And so keep in mind when you have those 20 days. Next slide, please. Non-traditional instruction. Now, of course, this is nothing new to all of you. We've been doing NTI fairly frequently over the last 20 months or so. However, there is one change that you need to be aware of going forward with NTI. Number one, keep in mind there are no additional NTI days. So the limit of 10 that you have is still a hard cap of 10. Those of you who have already taken some of those days, that you don't have more days to make up for that. You still have a hard cap of 10 for this school year. Keep in mind that the legislature will return to Frankfurt in January. And so just as with the temporary remote instruction, they could change this when they return to Frankfurt for the spring session. Again, those 20 days for temporary remote instruction do not count toward NTI. Again, 2 separate buckets. So you have 30 days total between the 2 buckets. The one big change that you will notice for your staff is that all certified staff, if you have an NTI day that is declared for COVID-19 purposes. Now, if this is a snow day, if we have a flu day, which, the flu numbers seem to go down, so we don't expect much of that, but those don't count in terms of this requirement. But if you have a COVID-19 NTI day, all certified staff must report to their normal workstations. All certified staff must report to their normal workstations and teach from their classroom, do whatever their job is from that normal work site, with the exception of certified staff who are quarantined for COVID-19 purposes. I will note that you might see a loophole here if say a vaccinated staff has tested positive for COVID-19. They feel fine, but they will not be able to work from their home on that day. They must either report to their normal workstation, their normal classroom, which obviously we would strenuously argue against that, or they must take a sick day, because the only exception is for those certified staff who are quarantined, not those who have tested positive. The second issue is for classified staff. They are not required under Senate Bill 1 to report to their workstation. However, the district may decide to require particular or designated classified staff who have to work at their usual workstation. That is a district level decision, however. That is not a state level decision, unlike with certified staff. Next slide, please. School calendar. This is the final issue within the attendance and instructional side of Senate Bill 1. As you all know, the state requires 1,062 instructional hours spread over at least 170 days. For those of you who have a math background, 1,062 is simply 177 instructional days times 6 hours. If you go down to 170 days, which is usually required by statute, that gets you to about 6 hours and 15 minutes of instructional time per day. So Senate Bill 1 allows districts to go under that 170-day requirement as long as you're still providing that 1,062 instructional hours, with two big caveats. Number one, no more than 7 instructional hours per day. So that is still going to put a hard limit on the number of days you can go down to. So you can't go any more than 7 instructional hours. And the other caveat is that no Saturdays for now. Again, I will go back to the fact that the legislature will return in January to Frankfurt, and they could change that depending on the circumstances on the ground at that time. And these other flexibilities with your school calendar are nothing new. We've dealt with these before in the past. So those of you who are considered old hands, probably this is nothing new for you. The district may schedule graduation before the final instructional day of the school year, and certified and classified personnel must complete their contract days, regardless of the number of instructional days. The district, if it's going to go under these 170 days normally required by statute, the district must submit its plan to KDE for that flexibility. That is not something that KDE will approve or disapprove. It is simply for informational purposes, because KDE is required to then report to the legislature by next November how districts revise their calendars to complete those 1,062 hours. Next slide, please. And the final, I think it's 3 slides that I have here, are regarding your staffing flexibility. So we get into substitute teachers, general hiring practices, and then finally how to bring retired staff back in to your district. So on the first side, substitute teachers, normally a rank 5 certificate requires 64 hours of college credit. And so you could substitute teach with that certificate. However, Senate Bill 1 has amended that for this school year only, that a substitute teacher must have 64 hours of college credit, or they can have a high school diploma and 4 years of relevant experience. Now, the district has the requirement to determine that relevant experience, and then submit that, work with them to submit their EPSB certification. However, those 4 years of relevant experience could be in childcare, something relevant to the education world, or it could be in the content area. The example that I have used before is, say you're in a district and you have a retired chemical engineer who lives in your community, and you want them to help teach chemistry. They could do that if they have 4 years of relevant chemistry experience. However, even with those experiences, they still must apply for a 1-year emergency substitute certificate. The district could employ them prior to receiving that certificate and the relevant background check if they meet those educational or experiential requirements. The second side of this is for normally, you may be aware, when you have a vacancy after the beginning of the school year, there's a 15-day posting requirement. You have to notify KDE. You have to search for minority candidates. All of those are waived currently through the end of this school year to help you speed up that hiring process. Next slide, please. So there's also some more flexibility for classified staff. Normally, certified or instruction has to be provided by certified instructors. However, for this school year only, classified staff may perform classroom instructional activities without certified staff oversight. They may also provide home and hospital instruction. There are two major caveats here as well. First, per IDEA federal legislation, students who have an IEP, their specialized designed instruction is the responsibility of certified special education teachers or related service providers, regardless of state legislation. So you may have your classified staff providing classroom instruction. However, under federal law, students with IEPs still have to receive their specialized or specially designed instruction from certified staff. The other issue is that to keep in mind at this time, we do not anticipate that there will be any federal waivers for school accountability purposes on the testing this spring. So keep that in mind when classified staff are providing instruction. Students will still have to live up to those accountability and data collection. So that is not something that I would anticipate any district would want to abuse, but that is something to keep in mind. And finally, this and the next slide will deal with hiring back retirees. Through January 15th, and this is I should say an artificial deadline created by the legislature because they will be back before that deadline and could amend that law. But through January 15th, certified staff who retired by August 1st, which has already happened obviously, may return to service with a little more flexibility than is usually given by the teacher's retirement system, and their flexibilities are usually guided by the Internal Revenue Code. So normally, you would have to go longer than a month. I think it's usually 90 days before a certified staffer who is retired can come back. Now they can come back with only 1 month break in service. And for those of you who are doing the math in your head, yes, anybody who has retired by August 1st, as is required, has already met that 30-day break in service, or 1 month break in service. Normally, there is a limit on how much those teachers can earn when they retire. By the way, I should specify that these certified staff returning, this is only for teaching positions, and we'll get to that in a moment. Only for teaching positions that they are returning. So the statutory limits on this service are removed. Normally, depending on how many years of service you had when you retire, those teachers are limited to 65% or 75% of their normal salary. That is essentially removed because the critical shortage program cap, which is the usual way that districts are allowed to hire teachers and pay them more, normally has a cap of 1% of your certified complement or 2 members, whichever is larger. And for the rest of this, or through January 15th, that cap is increased to 10% of your active certified complement. Keep in mind that cap increase will expire on January 15th. So this might be helpful for planning for this fall semester, but beginning in the spring semester, that could go away and you could be reduced down to that 1% or 2-person cap. However, districts may use their COVID funds, their ESSER funds, to cover these additional costs for the time being. Next slide, please. There is a similar provision for classified staff. There is not, they don't have that emergency cap. So, or the critical shortage cap like certified staff do. However, there is usually that break in service that is required, and Senate Bill 1 reduced that break in service to 1 month. So again, if they retire by August 1st, they've already met that 1 month break in service, so they can begin coming back. However, again, beginning January 15th, they revert to statute. Of course, if you've already hired them, they've met that 1 month break in service, so they will not have to leave at that point because they're not subject to that cap like the certified staff are. One question that we have gotten in the past that I want to bring to your attention, if you have a certified staffer who can be rehired, for instance, as a bus driver or in some sort of a classified position, they have retired from a TRS covered position. They are coming back to a CERS covered position. That full break in service has not been reduced to 1 month as it has been for certified to certified, classified to classified returnees. So that is something that they will still have to sit out. So if they retired by August 1st, they would have to sit out a full 90 days or whatever the case may be for that particular position. I believe that is it for my slides. Next slide. We are ready for the question and answer period. And I guess I turn it back to Steve for that. Or somebody else.
I was on mute. Yeah, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate all that additional information on the legislative issues. So we will get into the question and answer session. And Elisa, are you going to read those out for us?
I certainly can. So question number 1, do we need to have a copy of the vaccine card or a signed statement, or can we just view these documents?
Alyssa, I'll take that one. As I indicated in the earlier presentation, you really need to retain a record of that for auditing purposes later. I do encourage you to work with your HR professionals on the best way to retain that information as it is health information.
Thank you. Do we estimate a number of employees since we do not know how many are vaccinated at this point?
So I saw that question being posted, and maybe I can provide a little more clarity. I'm not sure if I will be answering the question, so whoever has asked this, if I don't answer your question, please feel free to follow up. But the question seems to be, how will we know how much to ask for? And this is why we have purposefully said that you'll not sign the assurance and send us that federal cash request until after the period expires for which they are eligible. So December 1st is the date by which they have to be completely vaccinated. And then we've given you a period of time to then pay that out through payroll. And then you will make it your federal cash request to us. And at that time, you will know all the people that have qualified, that you have validated as being fully vaccinated, and you'll be filling in the numbers of those people to request for that reimbursement. A very sharp finance officer out there, and I can't remember who it was exactly, noted that we had 2 different dates for your no later than date to submit your federal cash reimbursement. So we'll get that corrected on the slides. But the latest date by which you make that request and send your assurance to us should be March 31st, not March 1st. So March 31st of 2022.
Thank you. From the payroll aspect, how would we code the employer share portion? If the $100 payment is coded as 554 GV, wouldn't that automatically make the benefits come from 554 GV? And would we need to record the district part through a journal entry?
Okay, I'll take that one. This is Steve. You know, that's up to each district. Everybody does payroll differently. So if it's easier for you to do a journal entry, that's what I would recommend. Or you can run it straight through the 554 GV project code and then do it that way. So you can either do a GV or run it straight through payroll. What I've heard one district doing actually, and this will kind of answer another question as well, is they are running the 554 GV, and then the fringe they are going to pay. You know, the district has offered to match the fringe portion so that each employee gets $100 up to the $100. And so, you know, that's just something to think about and different ways to code that in each district. So You know, 171 of you do it differently anyway, or in some respects. So you just kind of look at all the different options that are out there for you and pick which one is best for you. Because we don't want to dictate, hey, do it this way because it's the only way, because it may not be the best way. And so each one of you do it differently. But if you have questions on how to do it in those myriads of ways, we'd be glad to answer those questions. But we don't want to specifically specify that, hey, it has to be done in one project or in another project and then do a JE or not a JE. So hopefully that answers that question.
Will there be additional guidance for setting up budgets to ensure maintenance of equity is achieved?
That one's me, Alyssa. Yes, we are going to try to do that. To be honest, when maintenance of equity came out this past year, one of the problems was, budgets had kind of already been done. So we were kind of scrambling in this whole 21-22 requirements. So once we get everything kind of buttoned up with 21-22, figure out who has the exceptions, who doesn't, what all we have to do, we'll circle back around and then put out some guidance and talk with finance officers later this year, maybe early next year, to say, here are some of the things you need to look at when budgeting. Here's what you're going to need to provide for maintenance of equity requirements. So here's kind of the things you need to look at in those high poverty schools that are in your district to kind of help you with budgeting. But like I said, we're going to try and get through 21-22 first, and then we'll look forward to making sure we give some help on budgets for 22-23.
Thank you. Can the vaccination status be verified by the Kentucky Immunization Registry?
I'll take that one, Alyssa. That is a really good comment. Let us take that under advisement. I would like to make it as easy as possible. Let us take that one. And then there's also another question, I think, somewhere in the chat that talks about, many of our school districts are actually hosting those vaccination clinics. And so you also have that information on file, information that you could assure that is taken place. So let us take both of those, and we'll be able to send that back out in an answer to those questions. But those are both good suggestions. We'll take those under advisement.
Okay. And what would be the name of the vaccine assurance to fill out in GMAP?
I honestly don't know that we've gotten that far, so I can't share that with you. I don't know that we've entitled it and put a name on it yet.
Okay. Several payroll implications on this. Could you confirm if FICA should be withheld from all certified stipend payments, since TRS will not be withheld? And are there any further exceptions to the stipend, such as local occupational taxes, and should those be withheld as well?
All right, this is Steve. So yes, definitely the local taxes, state and local and federal, should be withheld. That is one piece of that question. So yeah, those should definitely be withheld as any other payroll item. But to answer the question on the FICA, I see a later comment from Amy Smith, who said she checked with the IRS, and because it's not subject to CERS or KTRS rules, that FICA would need to be withheld on those employees. So that is something to keep in mind. So yes, the FICA, Medicare, and federal, state, and local will need to be withheld, but no on the retirement systems.
Okay. If someone is employed but on long-term leave during the eligibility period, are they eligible to receive the stipend? Does it matter if leave is paid or unpaid? And does it matter when the employee will return to work?
So that's a hard one, and it's part of the reason that we are so appreciative that we have those your good help in asking these questions. Typically, we were thinking about this as being available to those folks that are being paid. So you'll see this indication of, volunteers not being permissible. So we're really looking for that paid status. So on the ones that are on paid leave, yes, I would say that they are eligible. The unpaid leave is a little trickier. Let us give some thought to that one. And I had just typed something in the chat to my staff that because we are getting so close on time, if we still have more questions, we want to stay respectful of your time and end right at 2:30. But we will commit to do an FAQ for any unanswered questions. So we do have several that we need to address already. Alyssa, if you can give us maybe one more question, and then we'll see where it ends.
Okay. I moved on from that, so I apologize. Do we still need to collect household income from forms if we are a CEP district, or free reduced meal application for those who are not CEP?
I'll take that one, Alyssa. Yes, this year you will need to collect HIF forms if you are a CEP school district. Those HIF forms, remember, they don't just come in for things such as at risk, because I think that's the reason you're asking, is if everything's frozen and we're not doing at risk, do we need those forms? They still go to things such as your frisky funding. There's E-rate money attached to those. So yes, I would encourage you to continue to track those HIF forms, pull them in, put them into the system. Thanks, Lisa.
No problem. And we are at 2:30.
All right. So like Robin mentioned, we will look at all the questions, answer each one, and provide an FAQ for you so you can look at. So there are several folks that maybe weren't on the line today that might find the information beneficial as well, so you can pass that along to them. So again, we appreciate your time today, and if you have questions, feel free to email me or any of the other staff that you heard today. But we look forward to helping you out and to navigate these new items. You all have a good Thursday, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.